Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Margaret. I see Margaret's online. Hello, thank you for those of you who are joining me again for Sunday morning live knitting on Twitch. This is my soothing NPR broadcaster voice. This is my second week having a go at this. It's fun. I'm actually enjoying it. And like 40 people watched me last week, which is, what are you all doing? I joked to my colleague Martin that I planned on this being the most boring Twitch stream, but hey, maybe that's what people are into these days. So I'm still working away on this particular jumper, which is Lanatus, it's called. Lanatus is a project, a sweater from Susan Crawford's latest book, Evolution. And this is what it looks like so far. So it's a yoked sweater for myself that I'm making. And actually, I did a fitting this week, and I think I might even be able to show it to you online. Let me just see if I can pull up that. I tried it. So as I said, I had to take all of the stitches off the needle and put them onto a bit of wool so I could get it over myself. And so see if this works. Can you see that screen share now? Let me just check. Yeah, there it is. So this was me trying it on earlier in the week. So Margaret asks, yoked. So a yoke, think of a yoke for like oxen, you know, that wooden thing that goes around their neck. The yoke is the bit around your neck and shoulders. So it's the bit on this particular jumper that has the design feature. So you have an option to knit the patterns over the whole thing. Oh, thank you, Stitch and Shy. That's lovely. Says it's beautiful. It's you can knit the whole thing in colorway, but I kind of like the idea of just leaving the rest of it plain. So I'll be knitting the body and the sleeves plain, and so it means the exciting bit is the starting bit, and after that it's just this endless slog of stocking stitch. But that's what I'm working on now, and yeah. So I tried it on just to see my progress and see how far I was going, but I've got a ways to go. But yeah, I've had this, I don't know, yoked jumpers are fairly traditional to have a jumper that's got a sweater that's got some design around the yoke, especially for top-down jumpers where you start from the collar and work down the body, because it's really easy to work the increases into the design. And it's also great for doing seamless jumpers, because when you knit it, I guess most people think of a sweater, and in fact the one I'm wearing, you can see the one I'm wearing is rectangular. So the body is knitted as a rectangle, and you can see these designs go across it horizontally, and then the sleeves are knitted on as rectangles onto that. So it's like squares, in which case, you know, you don't get that sort of ring effect that you have on this one. Because this one is knitted neck downward and grows outwards, the designs radiate out from the neck, and so basically you do designs outwards, and it gets bigger until it gets to the armpits, and then you split. So it's seamless, so you don't have to sew bits together afterwards. I'm knitting a series of tubes, as opposed to something like this one I'm wearing, where I had to sew it together afterwards. And I hate sewing things up. It's a pain. So I'm very excited to show you this today because I'm nearly at the end of this particular ball of wool. And just to recap, for those who weren't here, the wool I'm using for this is Lana Grossa Cool Wool Fine, which is 100% extra fine merino. It's so soft. It's really soft. But I've only got this much. Where's the end of it? That's all that's left on this entire ball. And so I'm going to have to get this new ball going here in a moment. So I thought, what an exciting opportunity for you to see me join in a new ball of wool, because I'm sure non-knitters wonder, how is that done? Because you might expect that we make a knot, and we don't like knots in knitting. Sometimes you have to make a knot, but in 99% of cases, you do not want to make a knot. A knot will could come undone. B, even if you make the knot on the inside of the garment, it will end up working its way to the outside and be unsightly. It's a lump, so the wearer will feel it. So we try and avoid knots, and I will show you a few different methods for joining in a ball of wool. But that means I have to knit a bit to get to the end. So it's very convenient on this because I should say, and it's not really, because ideally I want to join in the new ball. Like I said, I'm not going to make a knot, but there's still a chance that you could see where the join is. And so ideally I want to join in the new ball in a place where it's going to be less noticeable. So you'll recall that I've got here a stitch marker, and that's marking the underarm portion of the garment. And so I really want to work in my new wool around that point so it will be less noticeable. So hopefully I've got enough to make it to that point. It's not the end of the world if I don't, but ideally you want to try and time your ball changes to be in a place, like if you're knitting something rectangular, you want to do it at the end of a row. So at the edge of a piece as opposed to in the middle. You know, if you make a change right in the middle of your scarf or in the middle of your cushion or jumper, you're probably going to see it, no matter how skillfully you do it. So I'm going to try and time it to the end. And it's always an interesting game of, as we call it, yarn chicken, to see if you will get to the end of the row or even the end of the item. If you're running out of wool to knit the end of the item, playing yarn chicken is, will I have enough wool to get to the end of the row? Because it's hard to judge. I mean, I've heard people say that, like, you know, rule of thumb is you can knit, it will use like three times the wool for the distance that you've got to go. Sometimes if I'm getting to the end of a ball and I want to be sure, what I'll do is at the end of a row, I'll tie a knot halfway through the remaining wool, and I know if I finish the next row without getting to the knot that I've got enough to do one more. So there are little tricks you can do to try and gauge. Other people buy very accurate scales. Like drug dealer scales, like scales that can measure in individual grams or fractions of a gram, and measure the weight of the wool that's left and do that way instead of going by distance. So you can see exactly how much wool you use per row. That's a little bit more accurate. I don't know if I'm going to make it to the end or not. But that's okay because I'm not particularly worried about it in this wool. As a thin wool, it's going to be less noticeable, the join. If it were a very thicker wool, that's another case where you definitely want to try and hide the join, not in a noticeable place, because there will be in a thick wool, it will be easier to spot. So I've got few folks on there today. Please say hello if you're joining. I would love to see who's joining us today. I think last week most of the people were from Australia. Sunday night in Australia, prime knitting time. So I did knit the sweater I'm wearing. I'll mention that. The sweater I'm wearing I made many, many years ago. It's called the Janetta Dexter Sampler Sweater because it is a sampler. All the patterns, they're all different. And so, as I was saying, practicing how to hold one color in each hand, this is the jumper where I got very good at that because I had to do a lot of it. And it's from a book called The Sweater Workshop by Jacqueline Fee. So if you're interested in it, look up The Sweater Workshop or the details of this. They are available on my Ravelry page. Oh, I can show you my Ravelry page. Let's just switch over. So if I go back to the browser, I've actually got Ravelry pulled up here. And if I scroll down, scroll down, these are all my projects on Ravelry. It was one of the first things I knitted. Where is it? Did I miss it? Is it possible I didn't put it on Ravelry? Oh, I don't think I put it on Ravelry. How odd is that? Okay, well, I need to go back and do that. I sometimes forget to put stuff on there, so clearly I need to do that. But yeah, Janetta Dexter sample a sweater. I bet I can find it. I'll just search on Ravelry and see other people who've made it. Sweater workshop. Okay, Sweater Workshop by Jacqueline Fee. So this is the book. That's what the book looks like. And one of the cool things she has you do as part of this book to learn how to make seam-free sweaters is you knit this thing called a sweater sampler. And I made one, and it's really weird looking. It's this thing that looks kind of like a sleeve. It's I always think of it as like the thneed from the Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax. Like it's a thing that, actually the sweater sampler is a thing that no one needs. So that's what it looks like. But it actually is a small little project that will have you practice a whole bunch of the techniques you need to make a seamless sweater. And so, yeah, if you're interested, you should definitely get that. But the book contains a few patterns once you learn the technique, one of which is this sampler sweater, which is ironic, of course, because this sweater is actually seamed. It's not knitted in the round. Let's see if anyone has knitted it. Wow, no one else has knitted. I really need to put it online because clearly I might be the only person who's knitted this thing. So I will definitely be putting that onto my Ravelry later today. Go back to this. But I knitted this particular jumper out of, it's not wool. This one I'm wearing is it's like a cotton acrylic, and it's made to be like denim almost. That's what they call it. They call it like a denim. I think it was a Bernat yarn, possibly. My mom sent me from the US. But it's meant to fade and wear like denim, and it honestly, it feels like a sweatshirt. So it's less of a sweater and more like a Fair Isle sweatshirt. And you can see I actually made it way too big. The neckline was huge, so I actually picked up around the collar and knitted sort of a separate collar inside just to kind of close it up a bit. And the sleeves, I remember I shortened the sleeves as well because I knitted it, and then because it's not wool, it just sort of grew and stretched on me. How are we doing on length here? Ooh, look, we only got about, I guess 6 inches less. All right, so it's time to join in the new ball. And where are we? Oh yeah, we're right in the middle of a front. So right where I told you I didn't want to do it, but it's all right, it'll be fine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the label off the new ball of wool. And when you can, it's always great to pull a new ball of wool from the center. If you pull it from the side, it's going to roll around as you're knitting. So ideally, if you can find the end to pull out of the middle, it's always better because the ball will sit there. So usually all you do is you just sort of stick your fingers in and poke around and pull out. Oh, look, I just pulled out a bit and I found the end. And so now that wool is coming out of the center of the ball of wool, and it's going to sit there nicely. It's not going to roll around as I knit from it. All right, so I'm going to find the end of that. Now there's a few different ways you can join in a new ball of wool. So one of the ways you can do it is to just stop knitting the old one and start knitting with the new one. So I'm going to put my needle in like I'm going to make a stitch. Okay, I'm going to leave the old wool. I'm going to take the new wool, here the new wool, and I'm going to just loop it over my needle, and I'm holding both strands together here, and I'm going to make a stitch. I'm going to make sure I'm now using the long bit, not the short bit. And I'm going to make a few more, make 2 or 3 stitches. And see, I'm not pulling very hard here because if I pulled hard, that wool would just pull right out because it's not connected to anything. So I'm being very gentle these first few stitches. So I'll do just a couple stitches. And then I stop, make sure the stitches aren't going to fall off. And you see that point where I've got 2 tails coming off. You see, one attached to one stitch and one attached to the other stitch. What I can do is I can just tie those together in a bow, and I'll leave them together on the back of the wool as a bow, and later I go in and I will weave those ends in. So I'll get a darning needle and I will weave it in on the back side of the garment. So if you're doing a thick wool, that's pretty much the approach you want to take. Another thing you can do, I'll show you another technique that works well with a thin wool that you can do. I'll just unknit these. So I'm tinking this time. Remember, we talked about frogging, which is when you rip it, rip it, rip it. Well, tinking is knitting backwards. Get it? It's knitting spelled backwards. Ha ha. But tinking is where I'm going to go back. And the way I do it, because a lot of people are curious about this, you can see I'm holding the working yarn with my finger to get some tension, and that makes the hole where I can see, and I'm just going to put my needle tip where the wool's coming out and slide that stitch off the needle. So again, just look for the gap there. I'm going to follow the wool with my needle. I'm just going to unknit, stitch by stitch. Okay, got back to the point we were at. So the other way you can join in a new ball of wool, if you're using something thin. Oh, hey, Donna. Hi, Hermione, she says. Ah, yes, that's my knitting friends. So the other way you can join in, another way to join in, there's lots of ways of doing it, is to make a stitch with the old yarn, like I'm about to keep knitting, but instead I'm going to stop there, and then I'm also going to use, if I can get it here, the new yarn as well. So I'm going to loop it over just like I did before, but I'm actually going to now knit a few stitches with both yarns held together. So again, make sure I'm using just the working end. And so now I've got both ends together. So I'm actually going to make a few stitches with both of those yarns together. And so if you look on the back side, you can see now, if I separate it out, I've got two ends, and this time they're separated by a few stitches. And again, I might make a bow just to keep them out of the way, and then later knit those in. And so by knitting them together, it's just locking them together a little more securely. But again, you really only want to do that in a fine yarn, because in a thick yarn, that bulk of those, because it is double thickness for those few stitches. You would notice it in a thicker yarn. In a yarn like this, you're probably not. And so the only trick is when I come back around for the next round, I need to remember to treat these as single stitches. So each group of two is a single stitch, not as a double, because otherwise I would end up increasing right there, and you really don't want to do that. So that's another trick you can do. All right, there is another technique, and I will show to you. And so I'm just going to tink backwards for these few stitches that I just knitted. So again, I'm going to put some tension on them, and I'm just going to use the tip of my needle right where they're coming through that stitch, and slide them off. And slide them off. So you just need to reverse a few stitches. This is how you tink back. You don't have to undo the whole piece. You can go backwards just a bit. Okay, so I'm back to where I was. So the other way that you can join in, and I'm going to have a sip of coffee here, is to actually join the wool together, to splice it. And there are different ways to do this. If you're doing some like very fine lace or something like that, there's a technique called, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, a Russian join, which I've seen done, and I know the theory of, but I've not done it myself, and I don't use it myself. But it's a way that you can literally join two ends together. The simpler way, and the way I often do it, and the way I might try here just to show you and be a little bit gross. Let me have a sip of water. Is to splice them together. And I can do that because this is wool. Okay, wool it's a natural fiber. It wants to cling together. It's got little sort of burrs on it, like a pine cone almost. Yep, Donna says correct on the Russian join. Cool, look it up. But you can do a splice, and one way to actually get the wool to join, to literally almost like weld together, is to join it together with some moisture and heat. That's how things shrink. That's how when your knitting shrinks, it's because you need moisture and you need heat in order to get those little burrs on the wool to lock together. And you can do that with some water, which is what I will do. You can also do it by spitting. Spitting into your own hand, which I have done on a number of occasions. Spit splicing in the great tradition of knitting. It's always fun. And hey, if you ever lose my knitting, it's got my DNA all through it, right? Donna was yelling out, spit, spit. Yeah. You want me to spit on camera? I'm not spitting on camera. Don't be gross, Donna. But the way you do it, the way I do it, is you put the two ends, you overlap the two ends here. You see I've got the two ends of the wool together. You overlap them by, a couple inches or something. And I sort of twist them together, just start twisting them together. I hope it will work. This should work. It's merino. It's a smooth merino, but it should work. And so what you would do is, this is the point where I would spit into my hand, but look, I've got a little bit of water here. So let's just pour a tiny bit of water into my hand. Yay. Soak the wool with it. And then I'm going to rub my hand. Oops, I'm getting water everywhere. I'm going to rub my hands together, back and forth. And I'm rolling those ends together. That's probably too much water. See, spitting would have been better. And I'm just going to rub my hands, because what I'm doing is I'm felting those ends together. I'm turning it into one piece of wool. And if you do this well, you won't even notice the join. It's basically one piece of wool, and you just keep knitting, and there's no ends to weave in. And I'm going to just wipe my hands off because it's all wet now. So I'm nearly done. So you can see that little bit of an end sticking out there. So I'm just rubbing, almost like I'm rubbing sticks together, and I can feel the heat between the palms of my hands. So we're getting that friction. We got a little bit of moisture in there, and I'm literally felting these ends together. And so I'm just going to make sure it's sort of a uniform thickness, because you can get a little bit of extra thickness. And again, you wouldn't want to do this if I'm doing it with a really thick wool. You can still do it, but what I will often do there is go back a couple inches on each piece and actually sort of untwist the plies and snip off some of the plies so that when I twist them together, it stays a consistent thickness. So that's another trick you can do if you're using a thicker wool. This wool is pretty thin, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to make sure, look, these are not going to come undone. It's more just about making sure that the thickness is even so you don't get a thick spot. And hey, look at that. That is a single piece of wool. All right. So I can just keep knitting, and I don't have to worry about weaving in ends. I don't have to worry about it coming undone. Just make sure it's really felted in. And I didn't have to spit in my hand, Donna, because that's gross and that's not ladylike, and God knows I would never do that. You're yelling spit, spit at your TV. Your husband's going to get the idea that this is an entirely different kind of a stream. No, this is a knitting, a nice, civilized knitting podcast. Knitting stream. All right, so now I just keep knitting. So there you go. That's another way to join in a ball of wool, is to do a splice. Can be a spit splice, can be a water splice, but you just need a little bit of moisture and some heat, some friction from your hands to get the wool fibers to join together. So it is slightly thicker there. Again, it is like I've joined two. It is like that where I showed you knitting two strands together. But it's not gonna, when I come back around the next round, there are single stitches, and it should be less noticeable than the bulk. So yeah, so there, we've joined in a ball of wool. Aren't you excited? That was the most exciting thing you're going to see in the next week as I work on this sweater. Joining in a ball of wool. So I always prefer to splice if I can. And again, you can only do that with a wool that will felt. So with a yarn that will felt. So with, and not all animal fibers do it, interestingly. I know we had for a while in Australia, you could get possum yarn, which are not creepy American possums. They're Australian possums, which are a marsupial. They're a pest in New Zealand. So for a while there, when they were culling them in New Zealand, you could get possum wool, which is really warm. It's quite nice. But the interesting thing was when I was working in a knitting shop, we knitted a sample of it, and it wouldn't felt. It wouldn't shrink. So I guess it lacked those, or I suppose it shrank a little bit, but not as nearly as much as sheep's wool. So it must lack those little barbs that catch. when you agitate it. So, but yeah, cotton, you can't really splice cotton. It will come apart. It will not felt together. Acrylic, definitely not. It really only works with sheep's wool. I'll get to the end of the row here. And just see how noticeable that join is. We'll see if we can actually spot it. It's funny. I've gotten less fastidious about making my knitting perfect the older I get. I started out and I really wanted to do everything correctly, and now I don't really care. So I knitted another jumper, another yoked jumper I have, which has a long color gradient. Oh, that one is on my Ravelry. I can show you that one. Where is it? Go back to my notebook. This one here, the Eyelet Yoke Light. So this particular yarn, you can see, has a color gradient. It changes color as you knit down. And again, it's a similar sort of pattern to this one I'm knitting. I started at the collar and I knitted downwards. But each time, because it's a cottony yarn, each of those color changes is actually done by a new color being joined in. They will drop one thread of the old color and pull in a thread of the new color. And because it's cotton, there's a knot in the actual yarn. As you get to it, there is a knot. And I sort of, when I got to the first one, thought, all right, do I want to cut out the knot? Because that's what you do if you find a knot in your ball of wool. You shouldn't knit it into your garment. You should cut it out and do a proper join so that you don't have the knot. And actually, I realized on this one, I thought, I don't care. It's fine. It's just for me. I don't care if there's a little knot poking out. And so I just knitted it. I just left it. And I'm fine with it. It actually does have a couple little knots. Like each time the color changes, there is a tiny knot. And a few of them have slipped out to the front. But they're locked in place. They're not going anywhere. So I thought, what the hell? I'm less fussy about those things. And I'm not putting this in any competition. If I were doing it for a knitting competition, look, if I was knitting this for the Easter show, for example, I would not have done that join in the middle of the front. I just on the off chance, I would have tinked it all the way back to the side seam, the other side seam, and done the change there, just to make extra sure it wasn't going to affect it. Donna, who is watching, not to reveal a secret identity here, but Donna has in the past done judging for the Sydney Royal Easter Show. And, I trust that Donna would be the kind of person who would look for that sort of thing. Not all the judges are that clever or observant, but Donna might look for that. All right, we're pretty much at the end of the row here. So I'll spread the stitches out, and I think that's where the join is. Look, there's a couple stitches that are a little bit thicker there in the middle, but I don't think you're going to notice it. Fine. Man on a running horse wouldn't notice it, so it's good enough for me. So new topic for discussion. I got a tweet the other day, and I will bring up the tweet. Where is it? It was a tweet from my friend Jed back in Australia. And Jed, where is it? I should have had this ready. See, I'm still working out my I got the screen share working. That was a big I figured that one out this week. But yeah, I need to do a little bit more organization so I have up all the tweets and things I want to talk about ahead of time. Where is it? Jed was asking me about software to keep track of